Hi, my name is Raymond Girard Bugay, and I write poetry under a pseudonym, Girard Tournesol. I've written a private practice for over 45 years, and only recently, from 2010, began publishing my work and joining writers groups and putting my work out there for critical review. I'm in a similar group for science fiction writing, though that has taken a segue because of the pandemic. And, I've continued to write and enjoy writing and participating in the writers' groups.
What genre did you mostly write in?
Oh, I've written poetry my whole life, and I had a desire to write science fiction, and I was chugging along pretty good there in a small group of people who enjoy reading and writing science fiction. And it was an interesting twist for me because the protagonist in my book of science fiction was from the country of China, and suddenly, may have been fashionable to cast Chinese capitalists as the bad guy, and suddenly with the pandemic, we're all in this together, and I have to rethink the work entirely. But I've continued to write poetry and encourage others to write, and I've been critiquing theirs and sharing our work together privately. And I've only recently tried to publish some work in some venues outside of the regional area.
Things changed quite a bit with a effective lockdown in earlier this year, with businesses being closed and in-person meetings being cut back. How has any of that affected your writing?
That's a great question. Um, we live a very pastoral life out here in the forest, and so we were secluded to begin with, and things were not very convenient to get to. Everybody judges how rural you are by how close the nearest Walmart is, and our nearest Walmart would be a 50-mile round trip, and we had stores closer that we shopped at. But so, you know, my spouse and I missed going out to dinner, spending time with friends, participating in writers groups, of course, larger groups than the pandemic would require, even in the green phase. So our life has changed to be more online and a virtual world to substitute our social interaction that we got from being a part of the writers' communities. We've been doing go-to meetings in Zoom, and with our friends, I've met some friends in parking lots of Burger King and elsewhere to chat about life events. But our life has changed in a way as far as how we touch other people and interact with them. So we're writing about the same amount. I'm writing about the same amount, and it's more introspective. And I think that you know people are being more conscious of the impact of even though we're all here and we're all in this together, the inability to interact makes us more sensitive to each other's mental health and physical needs and and physical health. So it's changed our outlook of how I and we look at the writers groups, and suddenly our friends became more family like, and it's been an interesting dynamic, very supportive, and it's been wonderful actually to see that was there all along, but in the pandemic and in the crisis, that to see the people come together and support each other has been wonderful, and each other's work.
Have you made any progress on your novel while you're being locked down?
my science fiction novel, is about 40,000 words right now, and I was shooting for about 80 to 100,000 words. I have several problems with the work because of the pandemic. Actually, the main protagonist is, I would say, ethnically Chinese. It doesn't come out and say that, but you can infer that. And in a future world where the science fiction novel is set, I extrapolated that somehow with communist and capitalistic venues and integrated with big armies, that China won a war in the future and was ruling a smaller population, and they weren't very good, nice people. But some of that, the reduced population and the world crisis hits home in a pandemic. So I had to rethink how I've been approaching the book, and so it's been kind of slow shelved right now to talk about some delicate sensitivities that were probably okay to wrestle with, you know, evil Chinese capitalists, capitalist communists, whatever they are over there, in a science fiction novel in the future. And it just may seem a little bit too insensitive right now to people of that ethnicity. So I'm rethinking how it works. I may even just make everybody aliens and be done with it.
Have you written anything shorter, poetry or whatever, that reflects directly onto the COVID-19 pandemic?
Oh yeah, I have. I've written a poem called Days that is a collage of images of having. I thankfully have not had the illness, but what it would be like 2 weeks of the illness, and a number of poems dealing with, the loss of loved ones and the inability of people to, a situation that I actually went through recently, having a loved one in the hospital and being unable to see or be or talk with them. Um, you know, Looking around a parking lot filled with people and with all the family members with a deep concern about someone in that hospital. And you could never imagine something like that happening. So it has come into my poetry. It's been on all of our thoughts. And I really try to approach it from a personal side and from dealing with the logistics and the heavy weight on our mental and physical lives, and in this environment. And as you know, there's even civil unrest in our time, so it's a very difficult time for everyone. And I have a firm belief that in times like this, it's when poetry and comedians are most important voices in society, because in comedy and in poetry, it's a reflection of what's going on out there in the world, and it's a very naked view of reality. So yeah, it has impacted, and I've been doing a lot of writing about the pandemic.
There's been some civil unrest the last 5 days. Have you been paying attention to it on television?
I unplugged from television a number of years ago, so I don't watch television, and I I like to pull my entertainment from when I want it from the internet, and pull my information from a variety of sources to get a balanced view of what's going on out there. But it sure as heck looks a lot like the '60s when you see the civil unrest. And I saw a sign that a young African American was holding up that it said, "We've come too far to have only come this far." And it really hit home because, you just suddenly, 50 years of civil rights, and what happened in the interim is reflected in what's going on right now. And it's horrific. I can't even imagine being a person of color, and um, it just, it just would drive you nuts. And I can't believe that some of this is going on now. As I understand it from the news, again, we live in a very rural, secluded area. It's very insulated from all of this, but it's also very visceral when you read the news and see some of the clips that are out there. That there's an anarchistic element to some of the rioting, and that peaceful protests, which I fully supported, were taken over by people who really aren't very nice people who aren't local to those cities, and people who just wanted to create anarchy and to smear minorities. So I've been sensitive to it. It's been very difficult. I feel there's a failure of leadership in the country. I feel that we don't have a moral high ground to complain about events in Iran and Hong Kong when these things are going on in the United States. I feel that it deprives the United States of its role in the world to have this social unrest, to have such a poor handling of the pandemic. The last statistics that I looked at, tuning out all of the politics, the numbers are the numbers. There's a lot of misinformation out there. I seem to see that we have about 1/3 of the world's cases and 1/3 of the world's deaths, but nowhere near 1/3 of the world's population. And that's a failure. That's a failure of government. That's a failure of society. And it's very upsetting. It really is. It shows a vulnerability of our way of life that you never knew existed. And you can even go back in history and see that we probably handled pandemics better over 100 years ago than we're doing now. So it's difficult to see.
Well, I don't think we handled the Spanish flu any better than what we're handling this.
Yes and no. It was an interesting psychological dynamic to the Spanish flu that so many people, it almost exactly paralleled COVID-19 with a launch in the spring of 1918. And it was so bad and so severe. In fact, the flu, people didn't die of the flu. The flu progressed to a very severe pneumonia, similar to COVID, where people turn pink, red, purple, and black, and then die. And it was shocking to see the amount of death, and it actually affected younger people more than older people. So there was an age dynamic, kind of in reverse to COVID back then. And it was so bad that they had this template that flus. It was a severe flu, the most severe they'd ever seen, but they go away, and they go away in the summer. It's the same thing you heard from the president about COVID. It's going to go away when the heat comes. So people let their guard down and believed nothing could be worse. So it was a psychology versus I thought there were some mistakes of how they handled it. There was I believe in Philadelphia, the case study was Philadelphia versus St. Louis. And the cities were competing with each other to pay for the war. The war was very expensive, World War I. And so they had parades, and they knocked on doors, and apparently they can reverse engineer and track and trace that the parade and the parade route was this enormous seed of the flu in Philadelphia, and it was brutal. St. Louis saw that and canceled the parades, and they locked it down. And so they watched and they learned, and they actually did kind of respond and saw how severe it was. But everyone let their guard down. Everyone, the government, they were just tired of it. And I see that same mistake happening now. Memorial Day happened. I never saw so many people without masks. They just said, heck with it. And I am concerned that history is going to repeat itself. But I felt society pitched in. Everybody was wearing masks. They told you not to spit, not because they believed spit transmitted the virus, but because they believed that you spit on the ground and then you walked in infected spit and you brought it back into your house from your shoes. Makes sense to me. So I don't think we've learned anything. All this technology and all this science, and it's just, I'll believe a vaccine when I see it, and it's a difficult time. It really is.
What are you missing from the personal interactions you would get at these writers' club meetings?
I think one of the things I like about the writers groups is the two things: the validation of your work writing, the part that's good, and then the soft critique of your work, of how to improve it and make it better. And so that feedback that's very intimate and personal, a lot of it is it's expressions. Even if someone doesn't say anything and they make a facial expression, you can tell they loved it or didn't like it. So the feedback is not there, and I miss that, and I miss the camaraderie. We are members of a group called Writers Block Party, and there was a party element to it. We had adult refreshments, we had some hors d'oeuvres, there was a party atmosphere, and then we read our work and we critiqued it, and it was wonderful. So I do miss it. The online meetings are somewhat of a kiss your sister type compromise, that I get to see you, like I'm seeing people on Zoom and GoToMeeting. It's great to see them and make that emotional connection, and to know that we're kind of together in the Ethernet. But I miss seeing people. I really do. Yeah, and I'm not a people person. Well, great seeing you, man. And I'll talk to you. See you tomorrow night on the Stained Glass Writers.